Hello and welcome to Creative Paper Flowers using Photoshop CC 2020. This original image created this final image. I'm providing the original image so you can follow along in Photoshop if you wish. I drag the layer down to the plus sign to create a second layer. I select that layer and rasterize it. Now I go down to the first layer again and select it. Go to the plus sign and create an in-between blank layer. Looking at my foreground background colors to make sure the foreground is black, I use Alt Backspace to fill that layer with black. This is just done for viewing while I'm making changes. I'm now using the selection tool to go to my main picture, make a selection of the component part that I want to use in the creative aspect. I've sped this up so you don't have to watch me make this perfect. You can stop the video anytime and do this while you're watching. Once I've selected the layer and made it perfect, I use the Alt J key to make another layer with only the selected part. Now I'll deactivate the full layer below it so you only see the background black layer that we created before, plus the selected component. Control 0 will allow you to size the image to full screen size, and using the spacebar will allow you to drag the image back and forth around the screen if it's too large in the screen. Now I'm going to the selected portion of the image on that layer. I'm selecting it and I'm using the move tool to move it down and resize it slightly on the background layer. And because I notice there's a portion missing at the top, I'm going to replace that section by drawing in a point to the top of this, just because I would like to make it perfect. So I'll spend a little time here with brushes, brush tool set small, and making sure that my brush is hard edged. And now I'm going to resize it so it really is about the size of the orange portion of the edge. A little trick in Photoshop is if I Alt click, I select the orange color. If I click my first position, then I move to a second position and shift click, it actually draws a straight line to that spot. Then I go down to the second spot and shift click, it draws a straight line back again. That's a little secret. I'm now going to use the clone stamp tool to fill in that area that I just added to this pattern. And I'm just going to Alt select the color in the background. I've sped it up a little bit so you don't have to watch me do this fill. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity to 5% and continue to click on and off around the edges there with a softer brush to sort of reduce the lines that were shown when I filled it in with a hard brush. Now that I have that totally selected, I'm very happy with that overall look. Now, because I'm not quite happy with the overall edging, I'm going to the filter liquefy, and I'm going to use a larger brush and I'm going to push some of those edges in. I've sped it up. You can do this if you like or not. And then once I'm happy with that change, I have selected that modification. Once again, another filter used, the filter called liquefy. Another secret in Photoshop, if I use the move tool and I hold down the Alt key while I click and hold and move on a layer, it creates a second layer identical rather than using other methods. I now deactivate the layer below it because I want to size this layer down to the final size that I'm going to use for the top of the flower. I'm trying to center it on the page and position it straight up and down so that I can use one of my actions, which we are also going to create. Sometimes when you need something repetitive in your creativity, you use an action. I currently have an action that will rotate a layer by 30 degrees after creating a duplicate layer of it. But in this case, you don't have that action. I'm going to show you how to create an action. If you don't already have your action showing, you go down to the Windows and click on Actions to have it show. I'm going to the plus button to create an action, and I'm going to call it Rotate 30 degrees. And start the recording. I'm going to place it under Default Actions, no other changes. Start the recording. So now everything I do will be included in this action. So I'm going to close this action so I can see my other brushes. Now I'm going to use the Move tool. I'm going to click on the corner of the Move tool, make sure I'm on the right layer, duplicate the layer so that I have an additional layer in case I need it. Click on the corner and you'll see the menu at the top changes. I go up to the degrees and change it to 30, and you'll see that I've now created a new layer, changed it by 30 degrees. Now I'm going to my Actions panel and I'm going to stop the recording. After I tell it to accept the changes. So you'll see that it has been added under the defaults. Now if I want to actually use it, I'll just click on it, go down to the play button, and I play it as many times as I want. This in fact creates a mandala, and in my case a flower head. So I do it as many times as I need to until I'm happy with the flower head that I've created. And now I'm going over to the individual layers, close my actions, go into my individual layers, the layers that were created, go down through the stack to where I started, and shift, select the bottom layer, and you'll see them all highlight, and then Control J if I want to duplicate those. If not, I just Control E and I have a duplicate of this flower. Well, every flower needs a stem. So I'm going down to the layer below that flower head, select it, and activate it. And now use the Move tool to selectively adjust it. And if I use hold the Control key down, I can do a transform on this layer. And what you see below it is the duplicate layer. So it looks like a double image, but it's actually a layer below. I'll go and deactivate that layer so you can see a clear reference to what I would call the stem now. If I hold the Control key in all cases, I can actually modify, move the layer around, make it thinner, make it fatter, give it a little curve, and try to make it look like a stem that would feed this flower. Now if you notice, if we go to the top menu here, once I've clicked and activated it, you see that modification to the transform tool that gives us ultimate control. It added a number of points on the transform component that allows me to operate 5 or 6 different sections of that transform much better than in past times. And by selecting that, I can now really modify this component. And Beyond that, if I want to go back to the liquefy tool, I can once again modify in high speed additional changes to that, what I call the stem. Now, looking at the size of the flower, I don't believe it matches the stem at this point, so I just enlarged it with the move key. And I like that quite a bit. Now that I've looked at the flower and the stem, it comes to mind that this might suit better if it's rotated flower head so there's a light side and a dark side, and that in later portions I might be able to provide some direction to the light and dark, and that's what my plan is next. So, does every flower have a similarly colored stem? I don't think so. So what I'm going to do is apply a hue and saturation level and clip it to that layer with an Alt click, and now adjust the color by changing the hue to green and perhaps making it a little more saturated and a little darker. And now I have something that looks more like a flower with a stem. Also, looking at the shape and size of the stem, I think I'll continue to adjust it slightly to fit the overall image and modify it, height, direction, thinness. And because I really like this stem, I'm going to utilize these two layers, the main layer of the stem plus the hue and saturation layer, select both and duplicate them and combine them with Control E. So duplicate it with Control J and combine them with a Control E. I now have a second layer on top of the existing layer. I'm going up to the menu at the top because I have selected it with a move tool. Put a minus in front of that 100%, which reverses the angle of that stem, and reduce it in size with the move tool, and modify it to my heart's content to make it resemble an offshoot from the main flower and stem. So I'm going to modify it the same as I did the large one, using the move tool and the Control key held down in various places to modify it. Now I'm going to go to the flower head itself using the move tool, which is a V key. Reduce it, duplicate it first, then reduce it, rotate it slightly, and resize it to suit the smaller offshoot from the main flower and stem. Once I'm happy with that, I commit to the change, and then I can go down and make yet a third copy of the stem and resize, reverse it with a minus in front of the width, resize it as a third stem off the main, because we all know that pairs in a drawing or image are less important than an odd number. So sometimes it might suit to fill the image and balance it more with an odd number. Again, go up to the main flower head, duplicate it, use the move tool, resize it, and reduce it to the third flower head, and rotate it so the dark area actually looks appropriate. Now I will accept those changes, and I believe I have my main structure done. So I'm going to disable all the layers, including the black background, so I have a blank screen. Then I'm going to reactivate each of the component parts that I want to keep. in the overall image, which is flower heads, 3 stems in their position. I'm going to go down to the main flower that I started with, and I'm going to use the keystrokes Shift, Control, Alt, E to make a stamped layer of all of those that you see visible on the screen. So at the top of the layer stack, I actually have a combined view of those layers because I want them all to be on the same level while I do other adjustments to them. If you remember earlier, I said I was going to apply a directional lighting to this image. So now I'm selecting the stamped layer on the top, going to my dodge and burn selection with a very soft brush, and at about 20%, I've sped this up for you as well. I'm darkening the left hand side of the stems and the flowers, and I've lightened the right hand side of the flowers and stems to look as though I'm sending light in from the right hand side of the image. I'm now darkening the base of the stems because I think it just looks appropriate. I'm now adding some additional interest to the picture by going to the layer below the stamped layer and adding an additional clear layer that I'm going to add some color and some special effects to make it look like light and dark. And I'm changing the color of the left hand side by selecting a color out of the palette. And this is an experimentation at this point. I'm just going to take my brush, make it larger, and because I'm on the blank layer below flowers with my brush, I'm going to just fill in the empty layer with something, and we'll have a little fun here. You can do whatever you like with this at this point, but you'll see I'm going to do some other things to this layer at a later point to just add some interest and some creativity to this. So I'll fill this blank layer with something other than the black background that we've had up to this point. And it looks pretty hard cased at this point, but once I add a gradient to this layer, you'll see quite a change. Now I'm going to accept the color to clear, and I'm going to clip it to the layer below with an Alt click, and I can modify it to suit my needs. In this case, my needs really, I'm building this as I go and trying different things. Either putting a gradient on my mask or adding other colors to it, just in an attempt to try and change the way things look. Obviously, I've taken the color too far, but at this point I'm going to go back to my blur, and I'm going to use a motion blur and give it some direction from the right and a lot of blur to the layer below. It's kind of interesting. Not sure I like it, but you have the ability to do whatever you wish to this layer. I think I'll go up to the opacity on the colored layer and reduce it. See what kind of effect that has. I think it shows up the gradient a little bit better. I'm going to select those two layers and combine them with Control E. And now I'm going to add a gradient to that layer, and you can see it changed it to black and white. Not happy with that, only because it defaulted to black and white. Now I'm going to go down to the gradient selector or editor, and I'm going to go through some of the options that we have built into Photoshop that probably you've never used. These are new ones in the CC 2020 version, and I can adjust foreground, background, the mix, the way it gradients between light and dark. I can do so many things with this, and I still have not actually clipped this layer to the layer below, which I should do, but because this is the only thing that I'm adjusting, the rest of the layers have been deactivated. I'm only applying this to this layer below it. So you can see how I'm playing with all the different colors, reds and blues, and I'm just going to accept something, then I will clip that to the layer below just to see how this looks. And sometimes just applying it directly to the layer will give you different viewpoints. And I have actually deactivated the layer, so it's working on a black layer, which doesn't do anything. So if I reactivate that layer below and clip it or make it a dissolved layer, you can see how that affects the gradient. And every time you go to a different type of blending mode, you'll get a different effect. And it really does work beautifully to apply different things in an attempt to get a different view. And we're just playing here. So what I've done is I've applied a mask with a gradient to it, and you can see how it's affected. I'm almost done with the image, but I need a final touch. I'm going to add a blank layer above the stamped layer as the very top layer. I want to add a stroke to this picture around the outside. I go to the menu, select all, I go down to edit, stroke, and the stroke color is black, but if I click on it, up comes the color picker. I go to the image, select the pink that I want, and accept it at 6 pixels, and you can see it's highlighted. Control D deactivates the highlight. But if I go up to the move tool, touch the corner, I now get a menu on the top, and I can change the size of that stroke, reduce it to 98%, which brings it just inside the edge. Accept it, and you can see now I have that tiny stroke inside the edge of my image. If I wanted to do something else with this image, I would select it, move all my component parts on the stamped layer to more of a central position. And that looks a lot better than the way it was. And I'm going to duplicate that layer because now I'm going to add some other effects to the underlying copy. Go to the menu, and I'm going to go to Pixelate, Mezzotint, and I'm going to Large Strokes. And any choice you make is going to be okay. All this does is break up the image so I can blur it. Go to Radial Blur, select Zoom 50% and the best blur, and see what we end up with. Not bad. I kind of like that. Can you see when I activate the layer above it what it looks like? I do want to change it somewhat, so I'm going to go back to the layer that I've zoomed out with the radial blur. Now I'm going back to that blurred layer, and I'm duplicating it with Control J. I'm going to actually apply that radial blur again because I like it, and it just darkens up the approach to blurring. I'm now looking at the blurred layer and I'm resizing it with the move tool to better fit the overall image because I think it needed a little bit of adjusting to fit inside the overall image. After I've accepted these changes, I'm now going to go to my layers stack and create a brand new stamped layer that contains that picture the way you see it. Of course, a stamped layer is created with the keystrokes Shift, Control, Alt, E. I'm going to all of the layers underneath and deactivating them because I don't need them anymore, and I'm showing you how the single layer has the entire image. From here, I'm going to depart a little bit from Photoshop because I do have Topaz 2, and I'm going to load Topaz and apply some other effects to it. If you wish at this point, you can be finished, but I'm going to show you a final adjustment that could make a difference in the texture of the image overall. As you can see, I'm now in Topaz 2. I'm in Looks. This is the options they have, and I have selected Earthy and all selections, and I can just go up and down and test how each of these looks appears with my image. And if I find one that I like, I don't have to necessarily apply it 100%. I can apply it, say, 50% or a little less, and slide it down. And if I like it, I can just say apply, accept, and voila, I now have quite a change to my original image as I completed it with that simple additional look added to via Topaz. And now for the part you've all been waiting for. Unashamed advertising to put my name on this finished product, and hopefully you can create something similar. Obviously there are many component parts that can be changed along the way. So I'm actually going to change the color of this because I don't like it, and create some text on top, highlight it, and there I go, changing the color. Accept the color. Of course, the final version of this, check your sizing depending on whether you're going to print or just have a digital picture. You may have to change the profile from ProPhoto RGB down to sRGB to satisfy the needs of a group. I've rasterized the image. I might have saved it as a PSD first, but now I'm going to save it as a JPEG and check sRGB, save the image, full quality, and now I am done. Thank you very much for watching.